Think about the Scotland we might have in 10 years' time in 2024. I think we could have a more prosperous country, a more just country. I know we'd have a more just country. We'll have nuclear weapons away, and we have a massive revolution in childcare so that every child being born into that country gets an equal chance. And that thing, I think, the last 10 years has been all right, but I think the next 10 years will be even better if, in 2 weeks' time, we grasp that opportunity with both hands. Well, that's already happening, of course, and people who normally vote Labour are moving yes in huge numbers, 300,000 so far, with many more to come. Ed Miliband has achieved something quite extraordinary. I mean, David Cameron's an extremely unpopular guy in Scotland, as we know. Ed Miliband is even more unpopular in Scotland than a Tory Prime Minister. I've never seen that before. So here we have the Labour leaders hand in glove with the Tory party, and they expect people in Scotland to vote for them. I think politely but firmly we'll be saying to Ed Miliband, go back to London, get back into bed with your Tory friends, and let Scotland vote for a better future. And that means SNP voters, Green voters, Labour voters, people of no political alignment, getting together to vote for a more progressive future for Scotland, a better society, a more prosperous country, and also a fairer country.
Good morning and welcome to the Full Scottish on this Sunday, the 13th of October. This is Broadcasting Scotland's review of the stories which have made the news over the past week. I'm Douglas MacKenzie and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Maureen Watt, a long-standing friend of the programme and a long-standing servant of Scotland as MSP for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine, as a minister in the Scottish Government, and most recently elected as president of the SNP. Welcome again, Maureen.
Thanks, Douglas. Good morning. Hope you're well.
Very much so. The news this weekend, and presumably for much of the coming week, will be dominated by the death yesterday in North Macedonia of Alex Salmond, former First Minister and leader of the SNP. Much will be written by leader writers and political editors over the coming week, but before turning to politics, Maureen, you served with him, you've known him for many, many years. What are your recollections of Alex Salmond, the man?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say how shocked I am, as everyone else in Scotland is, and especially in the nationalist movement. And my heart goes out to Moira and Alex's siblings, Margaret, Gail and Bob. It must be absolutely awful for them. Yes, I knew Alex since the mid-70s, was in 79 group along with him, and been on the journey to where we are now, and much of which he has led and cajoled everybody along the way. I mean, he will be missed in Scottish politics, although his stature has diminished in recent years. But we cannot forget the huge contribution that he's made towards Scottish independence, which is not just about one person, but is a movement and will continue. But no one can deny that, as we've seen and heard on the even the mainstream media over the past 24 hours, making a huge thing of Alex passing, bigger than I thought that they would. And it just shows the impression that he's had on UK politics and indeed politics in Europe. And, dying in North Macedonia is maybe just shows how internationally recognised he was.
Indeed he was. My experience of living in Romania was the same, that he definitely put Scotland on the map with the referendum, and it was very keenly followed here. Incidentally, that persisted with Nicola Sturgeon, particularly her handling of COVID, was greatly admired in Romania. It's probably too early to talk about legacy for Alex Salmond, but the move to independence and perhaps the reunification of the independence movement going forward might be the greatest legacy that and the greatest tribute that could be paid to him. Do you think that's possible?
I think that would be a great legacy. It'll be interesting to see if that happens, because clearly, there won't be any independence referendum or any negotiations on independence without the SNP being the strongest party in Scotland. Incidentally, before the news of his death broke, I was actually up campaigning in 2 local by-elections in Fraserburgh and Central Buchan in his old Banff-and-Buchan constituency. And people still, a few people on the door still talked about him. So, yes, it was rather ironic that I was there yesterday. But, a legacy, I think, would be the nationalist movement coming together, one single political party. And, we've already seen people wanting to rejoin the SNP from Alba, and we'll see whether that continues in greater numbers.
Indeed, and thank you very much for that. Now we turn to what is usually our first story, and that's the update from Ukraine on day 963 since the full-scale Russian invasion of the country. On Saturday, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russian forces had tried to oust Ukrainian troops from positions in Russia's Kursk border region, but that Kyiv's forces were holding their lines. Russia's defense ministry said on Friday that its forces had recaptured 2 villages in the border Kursk region where Ukrainian troops launched a mass incursion in August. Zelensky has acknowledged that the Ukrainian advance into Kursk was intended to draw Russian troops away from frontline positions in eastern Ukraine. The General Staff of Ukraine's military, in a late evening report, reported 47 clashes in the area around Kurakova and 27 more in the Pokrovsk sector to the northwest. It follows Russia's defense ministry on Friday announcing the capture of Ostrivska, a village on a reservoir near the town of Kurakova, a key Russian target in its advance through the Donetsk region. Ukrainian military recruitment officers have raided restaurants, bars and a concert hall in Kyiv, checking military registration documents and detaining men who are not in compliance. Local media reported Saturday that officers intercepted men leaving a concert by Ukrainian rock band Okian Elsi, and some were forcibly detained. It is unusual for such raids to take place in the capital and reflects Ukraine's dire need for fresh recruits. All Ukrainian men aged 25 to 60 are eligible for conscription, and men aged 18 to 60 are not allowed to leave the country. On Saturday, the Kremlin said that the Democrat Party presidential candidate Kamala Harris's description of Vladimir Putin as a murderous dictator exposed how politicians in Washington sought to impose their views on the world. The comments followed Harris's criticism of a report in the new book by US journalist Bob Woodward, which said that Republican candidate and former President Donald Trump, while in office, had sent COVID tests to Russia at the height of the pandemic. In a radio interview, she described Putin as a murderous dictator. Leaders of the group of atomic bomb survivors awarded the Nobel Peace Prize warned on Saturday that the risk of nuclear war was rising and renewed their call to abolish nuclear weapons. The international situation is getting progressively worse, and that wars are being waged as countries threaten the use of nuclear weapons, said Shigemitsu Tanaka, a survivor of the 1945 US bombing of Nagasaki and co-head of the Nihon Hidankyo group. Ukraine's military said on Saturday that it struck a Russian-controlled oil terminal in the partially occupied Luhansk region that provides fuel for Russia's war effort. Russian state media reported that the terminal close to the city of Rovenki had come under attack from a Ukrainian drone, but did not comment on the extent of any damage. Russian emergency services said they had finally brought a massive fire under control at the Feodosia oil terminal in Russian-annexed Crimea, which had burned for 6 days after being struck by Ukraine. Russia's defense ministry said 47 Ukrainian drones had been intercepted and destroyed by its air defense systems overnight into Saturday. 17 over the Krasnodar region, 16 over the Sea of Azov, 12 over the Kursk region, and 2 over the Belgorod region, all of which border Ukraine. In Ukraine, the country's air force said air defenses had shot down 24 of 28 drones launched overnight against Ukraine. Well, Maureen, various things happening in Ukraine this week, perhaps notably the whistle-stop tour that President Zelensky made around European capitals because President Biden had been unable to attend the Ramstein summit because of the hurricane in Florida, and Zelensky presenting his blueprint for victory. I don't know how much you know about it, but is it credible when he talks about ending the war in 2025?
Well, clearly we don't have any details of the blueprint for victory, and Zelensky does seem to be determined to all the leaders who are willing to meet him, and we don't know how credible those leaders find it. But clearly something has to happen soon, because just in the last few weeks it does seem to have the upper hand. What struck me most was, and thinking about it, why hadn't I thought about it, we hear very little from people in the occupied areas of Ukraine, like Donetsk. And I understand a Ukrainian journalist has been killed by the Russian terrorist, a young girl in her 20s. So we don't really, obviously hear much about how Ukrainians are living under occupation, and that's perhaps something that more light should be shone on. But of course, it's very difficult for journalists to get in there and to report. Something Zelensky has to come up with something soon, because we're going into the winter, and are we going to have another long sort of trench warfare winter, or is there something that Zelensky got up his sleeve and can put into action soon? But clearly it will require a lot of investment from his allies, and it needs to happen sooner rather than later, given the threat of a Trump administration in the US.
You say that it has to come up with something. I think he might well argue that permission to use long-range missiles into Russia would make that difference. And it seems that the United States continues to be the preventer of that. But of course, Kamala Harris's remarks, such as the one I mentioned in the introduction there, of calling Putin a murderous dictator, suggests that she might take a harder line against the Russians, and that after the election, provided she wins, that he'll be allowed to use those missiles to do what they're supposed to do.
Yes, one would hope so, and it's the fact that she has said what she thinks of Putin is really quite significant, because at the same time we know, you said that Trump had apparently sent COVID tests to Russia during the pandemic, and he always talks, doesn't he, about how well he gets on with Putin, which I find absolutely horrific and really frightening. And I hope, most Americans will too. But we have got to hope that Kamala Harris gets in, and that the United States thinks about whether, they want to invest now to prevent having to invest sums over years and years. And, a quick end to the war is better for everyone rather than a long drawn out process, which eventually will have to come to an end through diplomacy. But will it come to an end through diplomacy as long as Putin is leader of Russia? And that I doubt.
Yeah, and you also mentioned there the murder of Victoria, the Ukrainian journalist, and the plight of Ukrainians in occupied regions, even in areas which are not occupied, such as Kharkiv. The reports of the Russians hunting individual civilians with drones on what they're calling a safari is quite horrific, and we're not getting that coverage here anymore on mainstream media. Are we, or are broadcasters here forgetting about Ukraine, do you think?
Well, there is something called war weariness, isn't there, that creeps into media coverage of these things. And if there are other things that look more interesting to the media thinks are more interesting to, then they'll cover that. And there have been several times over the past month where I've thought, read about something in another journal, and others, newspapers or the media, aren't picking up on it in relation to Ukraine and Gaza. So I think that is just something that happens in journalism. Excuse me, my printer's making funny noises. I don't know why. I hope you can't hear it. I hope you can't hear it. Yes, I mean, the fact that this journalist was killed should really be front page news or headlines, but it's not. And you mentioned the fact that Ukraine is looking out for spies and infiltrators within its general population, and is having to do more increasingly, is really worrying. And they're dropping from drones kind of bombs or explosives that look like autumn leaves. I mean, that is absolutely horrific that people won't be able to distinguish an explosive from an autumn leaf falling. These kind of things, just who thinks these up? It's just awful.
Indeed it is. You mentioned Gaza and the Middle East, and that's our next topic today. At least 42,175 Palestinians have been killed and 98,336 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October. And more than 2,255 have been killed and 10,524 wounded in Lebanon. Israel has declared the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, persona non grata, with UN peacekeepers being injured after coming under fire from the IDF. Should it be Israel which is declared as a country non grata by the United Nations? The story that Maureen of the peacekeepers who had been told by Israel to withdraw from their position, but said no, we are staying, we're doing our job as part of UNIFIL, was quite horrendous. I mean, not for the first time. I know from Ireland that 48 Irish peacekeepers have been killed serving in the Middle East, but it is just such a blatant disregard of humanitarian law, international law, and respect for international organizations. Should the UN be taking a harder line? Can it take a harder line?
Well, I think Netanyahu seems to be wanting to make enemies of absolutely everybody, but still expect the US to back Israel. And, that's surely becoming increasingly difficult for whoever is the next leader of the US. I mean, we saw that when Netanyahu delivered a speech to the vast majority of countries, I think, walked out. And now he's saying that, essentially a peacekeeper in the United Nations General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, is a persona non grata. I mean, talk about isolating your country from the world stage. That's exactly what Netanyahu is doing. And I don't see how Israel currently can come back from this. So, I mean, we've talked often on this program, Douglas, about how I've thought that Netanyahu wants to completely obliterate Gaza, and we can see in the recent days when he's told people to move from the Jamallah camp, he's just making them move about the remains or the ruins of Gaza at his will. And now, we've got the situation in Lebanon and the West Bank. So it looks as if he's hell-bent on creating a conflagration in the Middle East, and it's very difficult to know how this will pan out.
Yes, worrying days indeed. Turning now to the United Kingdom, and many media outlets and papers noted the passing of Labour's first 100 days as the government traditional honeymoon period for governments. Its first 100 days in office have been marked by uncertainty about who the Labour Party is and why people voted for them. Change was the mantra, but without qualification what that change would be. Can they stick to Tory fiscal rules, cut public spending and borrowing, at the same time create economic growth? So there are the economic problems and criticism they've had in this country, also continuing with Israel and Gaza, whereas the Prime Minister in Spain spoke up last week about an arms embargo for Israel. Macron in France also took a strong line, whereas Starmer is doggedly pursuing a pro-Israeli line. So it's been a difficult 100 days for the Labour government, and one might say they haven't made a very good fist of it. What's your thoughts? What are your thoughts on Maureen?
Yes, I read somewhere that we should forget about this first 100. Apparently, it was something that started off in the Reagan administration way back when, as a performance measure of new leaders. But certainly, Keir Starmer has not had the easiest 100 days, or a positive 100 days. I mean, one can say that the riots were not of his making, and that was kind of started off his first 100 days, but the rest has been entirely of his own making. The cash for suits and specs, and not just of himself, but his cabinets, many of his cabinet ministers. He obviously has got no idea how to run an office, because otherwise he wouldn't have got in the mess that he's done with Sue Gray. And then we seem to be waiting interminably for the first budget. And in the meantime, his poll ratings is crashing, and one wonders what Rachel Reeves can pull out of the hat to turn this around for the Labour Party. There's now talk, as you and I have talked about on this programme, not sticking to the current fiscal rules, and it'll be interesting to see what they do in that part of the budget. But yes, whether he can turn things round in the next 100 days, be interesting to see.
Yeah, I was very struck in our little intro piece of Alex Salmond speaking during the referendum campaign in Kilmarnock of the Tories and Labour being hand in glove. Not very much has changed in 10 years, has it, in that regard?
No, absolutely not. In fact, they're probably closer than we ever thought that they would be. And prior to the election, we talked about changing out blue Tories for red Tories, and that's exactly what's happening, unless, as I say, there is real change to come about as a result of the budget.
Yeah, and staying with relations between Westminster and Scotland, the Nations and Regions meeting this week. Nations and Regions was a term invented by Tony Blair's government to tell Scots that as far as the UK is concerned, Scotland is equal in status to the English regions. Is the new Council of the Nations and Regions Sir Keir Starmer telling Scotland exactly the same thing? And can the UK be a union of equal nations when one nation dominates the others? Again, turning to Alex Salmond, one of the last things he said before his death was that John Swinney should not have attended this meeting at all. Further criticism came from, for example, Leslie Riddoch, who said that Scotland joined the Union as an equal with England, not as an equal with Peterborough. What are your thoughts, Maureen? Should Scotland just have boycotted this, or was it useful to have some sort of engagement?
We'd be damned if we did and damned if we didn't. And I think, John Swinney has to engage as much as he can with the Westminster government. Otherwise, he'll be, as I say, he'll be damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. It was interesting, wasn't it, that was probably one of Alex Salmond's last tweets. And I can see where he's coming from. Clearly, Tony Blair thought that devolution would kill independence stone dead. I think was that a Donald Dewar quote, but certainly the Labour Party at that time thought it would kill independence stone dead, and certainly hasn't. Indeed, more people yesterday when I was at canvassing still in favour of independence. We have got all opportunity to remind the rest of the UK that Scotland is a nation, has been a nation, and can be a nation again. But I do think that John Swinney has to engage. Otherwise, we could miss out on vital investment if we were abstentionist on this. So it is difficult, John Swinney, to cut the right jib, if you like, in these talks. But talk, I think, we must, and still at the same time remind the Labour Party that Scotland is a nation and can govern itself, and is not, and the Scottish Parliament is not, as I think Tony Blair famously said, just like some county council, did he not? If the Labour government do not show Scotland the respect that it deserves as an equal nation, then I think we will see more and more people joining us in our fight for independence.
Yeah, it's interesting. Also, many unionists will say, yes, we're against independence, but we're still proud Scots. The silence from the Scottish Labour Party, or the Labour Party in Scotland, I should say, regarding Scotland's status in this has been deafening. Surely one would have expected them to stand up for Scotland's position.
Yes, and it just shows that the Labour Party in Scotland is governed by their Westminster colleagues. I mean, this is just the latest in a long line of things where Hannah Sarwar has found himself in difficulty saying one thing prior to the election and then having to say something different after the election. And obviously, we saw last week when there was a debate in the Scottish Parliament over winter fuel payments that he was very, very uncomfortable. And indeed, some of his parliamentary colleagues either abstained and two voted with the Scottish Government on the motion. So Anasar is being fraught with all sorts of difficulties, not a situation he wanted to see himself in, as he sees this period as a campaign towards the Labour Party winning in 2026 in Scotland. I think he is going to find that the road to that is going to be a lot more rocky than he thinks, and the destination is not as in his sights as he thought it might be.
Yeah, we spoke about the difficulties of the UK Labour Party in its first 100 days, but there's probably a case could be made that the first 100 days for Labour in Scotland has been even worse, with the talk of read my lips, no more austerity, and the Labour Party being very confident of taking control of Dundee City Council, and in the end, two wins for the SNP. So they must be worried.
Yes, clearly Dundee was a big blow for them. They really thought that in the Yes City they were on course to deal the SNP another blow, and didn't. And the SNP have consolidated their position on the council there by holding a seat and gaining a seat from Labour. So they've kind of been stopped in their tracks there, and we'll see what happens in other by-elections throughout the country. But clearly, I think Hannah Sauer thought he was going to get a clear run to 2026, and that's not happening. And we're seeing that reflected in polls too. I mean, the poll for Keir Starmer's personal ratings has plummeted, and that is definitely being reflected on speaking to voters on the doorsteps.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to give advice to the Labour Party in Scotland about strategy, but it does seem bizarre that they've had so little to say about GB energy in Scotland, or indeed the fact that carbon capture, which was once promised for Peterhead, is now not going to take place in Scotland and is going to be an English-only activity.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't understand that. I mean, the Econ project has been on the cards in planning for decades and much longer than any of the projects in England. And why it isn't getting priority it deserves is beyond me. I just do not know why they're not going ahead with the Econ project in Scotland, and others, as I say, that are not nearly as far developed are getting the go ahead. I think Keir Starmer needs to be asked that outright, and why that is not happening. I mean, he keeps both the Tories and Labour now are putting that off, and why is that? They need to come to us.
Yeah, the promise of Scotland at the heart of government seems to ring very hollow now, does it not, after the first 100 days?
Absolutely. And, although we now have only 9 MPs in Westminster, they are a band of brothers plus Kirsty who can make a big noise. And we've seen that in Stephen Flynn providing the opposition when Labour were in opposition and not doing very much because they wanted just to keep their nose clean. And I'm sure we'll see over the coming months the SNP making a noise and providing opposition much bigger than the numbers. Douglas is frozen. Yep. Yes, as I said, it'll be interesting to see what happens towards the budget, and then thereafter, I'm sure there will be much in the budget that our Scottish SNP MPs get their teeth into. We'll see whether the budget reflects what seems to now to be a complete ignoring of Scotland and its needs. As I said, the Acorn project would have been an ideal example for the Labour government to show that they were committed to Scotland. And I mean, the fact that most of the energy now, or more and more of the energy now, is coming from Scotland to the rest of the UK, and Scotland is seeing no benefit of that whatsoever. I mean, I was talking to one person on the doorsteps yesterday who said, oh, we should have had independence when we had oil. And I'm saying, well, there's a second bonanza that's going to last a lot longer than oil in renewable energy, which will not run out like oil is going to. So I think the vision for Labour in Scotland is very dodgy, and as I said, not the clear run that Anna Sarwar was hoping to get up till 2026. I think our presenter has gone. He's actually broadcasting from Romania, and I think the link has gone down. So, and our producer is coming to us from Bosnia. Yeah, producer wants me to go back and reminisce about Alec. Yes, it really is very sad, and I can't help thinking about Moira, who we know is older than Alec, and she must be absolutely devastated. But they had such a great life and full of verve and joy. And as many of the commentators have said, Alec liked living life to the full. He was never happier than when entertaining people at Champneys Inn near Linlithgow, where he was from. But when he was in the northeast, he was equally at home in various hostelries. But that wasn't just Alec. He loved debating while he was out with folk, and he could be very sharp. And there's many a time that he and I crossed swords over things in the northeast. But it was funny when you eventually heard him taking your line and taking up things that as his own that I had suggested to him. I was angry at the time, but I'm glad that he took them up. So, and he did lots of very innovative things, like, I suggested that he use the old prison at Craiginches for housing development, and we just left the council to give us planning permission, and the Scottish Government gave money to a housing association to build some super housing there. So there's lots of happy memories of Alec. It's just pity that it went sour more recently. Have you got the link back?
I'll welcome myself back to the
welcome
program.
Back.
Thank you. I thought it was you who had disappeared, but in fact it was me. So I stopped you in full flow about Scotland at the heart of government. And do you have a final thought on that, and where we're going in the next 100 days?
Well, I think that at every stage, Keir Starmer needs to be reminded that the nations of the United Kingdom are equal, and if he doesn't, then I think that we will see a further surge towards independence for our nation, because the arguments that we're too wee, too poor, and can't do it just are not true. Never have been, but are not true when the wealth of our renewable energy is flowing south. That we still have many of our universities in the top 50, much punching well above a wee nation should. So I think more and more people are looking at why we should have independence and the benefits of independence. And of course, the route should become inevitable when, 60+% of people are saying that they want the choice again as to what Scotland's future should be.
Thank you. Our final story today is from Bosnia, where we had hoped to have Ika Ferrer-Cottage, a long-time supporter of this programme and chief editor with CNN, to talk about it, but sadly she could not be with us. But the search for people still missing in the aftermath of the catastrophic floods. We have some drone footage, as you can see, of the damage to the country. So far, there are 25 confirmed dead and 3 still missing. A fundraising campaign and the website pomosi.ba has raised over 1.25 million Bosnian marks in donations. That is the equivalent of €600,000. And to put that into perspective, Bosnia is a country whose population at 4 million is less than 80% of that of Scotland. So fairly dreadful times in Bosnia for these villages. I mean, I know from myself the misery of flooding. Maureen, you'll be familiar with it from Stonehaven. But this seems to be, although this may be connected with logging, it does seem to be one of many severe weather events in recent times. Hurricane Milton in Florida, close on the heels of Hurricane Helene. Temperatures in southern Europe getting close to 50 degrees over the summer, which really makes the point that climate change is not about targets for 2050 or even for the mid-2030s. It's something for now, and makes the importance of just transition in Scotland and renewable energy even more important, does it not?
Absolutely, and to look at first, it certainly hasn't had the coverage it deserves in the mainstream media compared to the coverage of the hurricane that hit Florida, and the devastation there looks absolutely awful. I saw a picture of the rails of a railway, just the rails hanging there, and all the infrastructure around it had disappeared. So there's an amount of reconstruction and reparation that needs to happen in Bosnia. But you're right that these weather events are happening all over the world, and what was worst was Republicans saying that the government in the US controlled the weather. I mean, where are they coming from? And that Trump is a climate change denier. So if he got elected or re-elected, God forbid, we're not going to see any climate change action from him in the US. But surely there cannot be many people who who still don't think that our climate is changing and that we need to move away from fossil fuels, which are a large contribution to that. And, it's great that Scotland is still seen as in the forefront of a just transition. It would be, and we have got to recognise that other countries are doing their bit too. I mean, China is building solar wind farms at a huge rate. So, climate change deniers will say, oh, well, we can't do very much. We're just a small country. But we've all got to do as much as we can to get away from fossil fuels as quickly as we can, because, as you say, Douglas, we haven't got the time to wait till 2050 for it all to happen.
We spoke a couple of weeks ago about the politicisation of abortion by the right wing. It seems a similar thing, excuse me, is happening with climate change. That, as you say, this conspiracy theory of the government controlling the weather in the United States and the right wing being predominantly climate change deniers. Now, forgive me for saying something positive about Margaret Thatcher, but she was one of the first politicians to recognise climate change way back at the beginning of the 1980s, and she did it as a scientist, not because it was political dogma. Why has this? I just don't understand why things like this get dragged into politics and then labelled left and right when it's a simple matter of scientific fact.
Yeah, and we see that happening in the UK too, with Nigel Farage and the Reform Party being climate deniers. I've heard Richard, one of their MPs, talking about it just in the same way that Trump and some of his Republicans do. To make it political is just ridiculous. I mean, clearly that, we have got to take the public with us, and some people find it more difficult than others. And it is expensive. We can see it making of our energy bills. But, as we've seen, don't do this, the results are catastrophic. And we're very lucky in the UK to live in a temperate climate. Sometimes I think we don't appreciate that enough, and that we are not subject, as some part of the world, to hurricanes and tornadoes. But that's not that things won't happen in the future. And as you said, Douglas, we've seen huge storms hit the northeast coast off Stonehaven. We've had flooding of the River Dee, which has been huge and caused decades of damage to places on the river banks, and weakened bridges and all that sort of thing, which we're going to have to pay for over the next decade. So it does affect everybody, and we have to recognise that and change policies to reflect that. And that's going to be difficult to take the public along with us.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it costs to make the changes initially, but I mean, equally, as you say, it's expensive to repair the damage. The flood protection for Stonehaven didn't come cheap. And earlier on, flood protection for Perth. So I mean, it's a necessary investment, which will probably be cheaper doing it now than trying to repair the damage in future, I suspect.
Yes, absolutely. And as I say, it's not just flood protection along our coastlines. I mean, coastlines have shifted for generations, and councils and government can do their best there, but some of it won't be able to be saved. I mean, I remember there was a village at the mouth of the Spey that has been washed away in my lifetime. I remember my granny taking me down to see a house just teetering on the edge. And as I say, the bridges along many of our bigger rivers are really getting affected by storm surges and water surges, which is a big problem in a county like Aberdeenshire, which has got hundreds, if not thousands, of bridges, and many people are already having to make big detours to get across rivers like the Dee in various places. So it's not something that's going to go away, and it's something that's going to have to be addressed in terms of capital spending the next few years.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around 2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We are at crisis point and really need your donations right now to be able to pay our bills and survive. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you very much to Maureen Watt, who, as always, was a very interesting guest today. Thank you, Maureen.
You're welcome, Douglas.
And thank you all for watching. Whether you always agreed with him or sometimes found him absolutely infuriating, I'm sure whatever political hue, people will agree that with Alex Salmond's death, Scottish politics will be poorer, and so will the nation of Scotland. We may not see his like again. Goodbye, and thank you for watching, and please join us during the week on Broadcasting Scotland. Goodbye from me.